Welcome, Cooking with V. I'm Verdell. Today I'm going to take you through making one of my favorite all-time cookie recipes. It's a recipe that I grew up with my mom making and my great aunt. And so it's called a gumdrop recipe, and I just want to take the time to actually show you how organized my mother was. So my mom had this cute little recipe book made by Betsy Clark. And she was so organized that she has an index of all of her recipes and then an index card for each individual recipe. My mom was really good at actually referencing all the sources of her recipes. So the recipe today, the gumdrop recipe, is from my Aunt Myrtle. And my Aunt Myrtle is in her 80s. And it's just a fabulous, really chewy, soft cookie with a base of coconut and oatmeal. And it's a super easy recipe to make. I've already preheated my oven to 350 and I've prepped most of my ingredients so to make this really seamless. And I'll walk you through it so that you understand the process. There's no shame in actually looking at ingredients. A recipe as you're cooking is actually a great reference. I'm not the greatest about following it exactly. With baking, there is some room for movement. Where you want to be careful is when you're using baking soda and baking powder, because it's a chemical reaction, and if we don't have enough, they won't rise. If we don't have enough, they won't stick together. So that's where we need to be careful. But other than that, sometimes you'll just see me throwing stuff in, a pinch here, a handful there. So I hope you enjoy. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments below and I'll get back to you. So what I want to start with today is I have 4 cups of oats. I really enjoy rolled oats, and all of my ingredients are organic. I also have some shredded coconut already prepped. My 4 cups of flour. Today I'm using 2 different types of flour. I had an all-purpose flour and then I have a rye flour. So my cookies are going to be a little darker than normal. Typically my mom would only use all-purpose. It's important to use really good sourced ingredients, so organic, pure vanilla. I don't like vanilla extract. I've already sorted or measured my baking soda and my baking powder. And I'm actually doubling the recipe today because my goal today is actually to put a little care package together and send it to my dad who lives in Ontario. I'm going to be using 2 different sources of sugar. So I have a coconut palm sugar and then I have a cane sugar. And again, just combining them. I have my salt, and the favorite part of the recipe is gumdrops. And so they're like jujubes that have sugar on them. And this year I was really fortunate. I found them that they're real fruit juice. So there's no food coloring in these, which makes me extremely excited. A little bit of a challenge to cut them up. So it's really important. I was actually going to show you how to do that. And so one trick is to use a flour cutting board and to flour my knife. And make sure every cut I add flour so they don't stick together. And so at the end of the video, I'll actually insert of how to cut the jujubes, the gumdrops. And I also am using a combination of eggs, and it just so happens that I have my own chickens. And so these are my beautiful chicken eggs. They're really my pets. And then I'm using organic store-bought eggs, and you will really see the difference when we crack them, and I'll show you that. And of course I'm using organic butter. Butter is really important to source organic because if cows are fed GMO foods and are not on good feed, all of the you could say bad stuff, let's speak in layman's terms, ends up in their fat. And butter is really the fat, and so we want to source really good sourced butter. Okay, so I'm going to start with my wet ingredients, and it recommends that I beat the eggs really well. And I'm just gonna do a little demo here. So if you can see, this is the store-bought organic, and this is my organic homegrown eggs. So there is quite a difference in color. So I'm just going to use the whisk and whisk these up. And we're basically just combining all the ingredients. It's a really easy recipe. I'm really a fan of using a mixer, and today I'm just going to use a hand mixer. Let me grab that. These are really easy to pick up. Any kitchen supply store sells them. A Canadian Tire, a Walmart. But in these times, it's really important that we are supporting the small, private companies that are owned by mom and pa. So local businesses, they could really use our support. And so this is a great tool. And it really helps to combine things and speed things up. So the first thing I want to do is combine the butter and the sugar. I often cut down on the amount of sugar that a recipe calls for. Things are way too sweet. So because I'm doubling the recipe, it's going to look like a lot of sugar, but I'm actually not doing full cups. So. There we go. That's enough sugar. So that's it. Unfortunately, our plugs in the kitchen are only at the back, so I'm going to have to go there and get set up. So I have my butter in here, and I'm just going to add my vanilla. And again, vanilla is one of those things that I don't really measure. So, okay, and so I'm just going to head over to mix in. So I'm going to blend my butter and my sugar together and my vanilla, and then I'm going to add the eggs to it, and then I'm going to come back. So I'm just going to be over here. There my eggs go in. And so you can see now my butter, my sugar, my eggs, and my vanilla are well blended. And I'm just kind of sizing up everything. I live in a kitchen where we actually have lots of bowls, and I'm realizing that it might be very tight by the time I get my 4 cups of flour in here and my 4 cups of oats, my 2 cups of coconut, and my 2 cups of the jujubes, that I might be overflowing my bowl. And I like to work with a really big bowl. So I'm lucky that working in a commercial kitchen that I was able to acquire some of the kitchen equipment when the hydroelectric camp that I cooked for closed. And so here's one of the bowls. It's huge, but it's such a treat to mix things in. So I'm just going to set aside my wet ingredients, and I'm actually going to mix in all of my dry ingredients. So the first thing I want to put in is the flour. Then I'm going to add my salt, my baking soda and baking powder, and then I want to combine them well. And again, it's for a chemical reaction, so just mixing them up. I'm a real fan of using wooden spoons rather than plastic. Okay, so my flour is now combined, and I'm going to add in a little bit of my oats and a little bit of my coconut flour, sorry, shredded coconut, and then I'm going to add in my wet ingredients. Trying to get all the ingredients out and not waste any. There we go, perfect. Okay, now I'm gonna just start mixing in. With some cooking and baking, we can overmix things, so I just want to be aware of that. With cookies, we're pretty fine, but with pastries and breads, we want to be careful that we're not overmixing. So I'm wanting to combine this all, so it should be wet. And so I'm actually stirring rather than folding or cutting. And we can go over those later in other videos when they come up. So I'm just stirring, mixing it all so it becomes wet. Okay, I'm almost there. Making sure to scrape the bottom of the bowl. Okay. So now my dry and wet ingredients are all combined, and I'm going to add the remainder, possibly not all the remainder, but all the coconut, and definitely all of the gumdrops. And again, I'm just going to keep mixing, combining, until all the ingredients look evenly distributed through the cookie dough. Oh, even the smell reminds me of my childhood. Okay, this is nicely combined. This is kind of like the dough looks like, and I'm going to add a few more oats. So that's one thing with the oats. You can just sort of add until you feel you have the right consistency. I haven't had these cookies in about, I'm going to say 15 years, so I'm pretty excited. right consistency that I'm looking for. And over time, you'll get to know exactly the consistency you're looking for. You don't want it too dry, you don't want it too wet. You want it to be able to hold together. And so my next step is going to start preparing for what I'm going to place it on. So I have a baking sheet, and I love using parchment paper. And parchment paper is great because you can reuse it, and it allows the cookies not to stick to the cookie sheet you're using, and it's really easy to clean. So I'm just going to take a moment and wash my hands, because typically when I'm making the cookie, I'm probably going to be using my hands. So I just want to make sure I have really clean hands. So my hands are washed. I have 2 spoons, which are going to allow me to hopefully have the cookies unified. So here's my cookie sheet with the parchment paper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use 2 spoons to kind of get a size. So I want it so it fills, kind of covers the whole spoon, and then I'm just going to use that to place it on the cookie sheet. The other thing that we're looking for is we don't want a cookie sheet. We actually want individual cookies. So it's really important that I leave spacing. All cookies are actually going to spread out unless I use more baking powder. The more baking powder I use, the stiffer the cookie comes. So it is important that I am leaving some space because they will spread. And I'm just going to size them to make sure that they are all the right size. And it's kind of important when you're baking cookies because those that are smaller are going to overbake and the others are going to be underbaked. So I just want to kind of size them up to make sure they're all the same size. So here's a great example. I have 10 cookies on the tray. I'm going to pop them in the oven, and they're going to be in the oven for roughly 9 minutes. And so I'm just waiting to check if my oven runs hot or on the cooler side. So I'm probably going to set a timer for 6 minutes, check them at 6 minutes, spin them, because sometimes the oven is warmer on the back than it is the front. So I'm kind of just new with this oven. And then we'll see what it's like. And I hope they turn out great, and I can taste test one in front of you for you. So I'm just going to put my timer on and we'll wait. I can start to smell the cookies, so I just want to check on them. I'm roughly about at the time that they should be coming out, so I might just peek in. Here's a great example. So they're forming up really nice, and I can now see them starting to brown, and even around the edges. So this is how we want to cook a cookie. We don't want to overcook a cookie. So I'm just going to place these on a cooling rack, and it's really important to have cooling racks. Allow the airflow to go underneath the rack so it doesn't continue to cook. And the moment these are cool enough, I want to get them off, and I want to put them on another rack so they don't continue to cook because the pan is really hot. So the cookies have cooled enough to come off the tray. I'm so excited. They just smell so familiar. It's like I'm getting a flush of memories. And so while these continue to cool, I can get more raw dough onto my cookie tray. And this time I'm just going to show you what it's like if I use my fingers, because sometimes it is faster. So I'm using the spoon to get the size of how much dough I want, and then my fingers to drop it on the sheet. Size. Okay. So I'm going to use my clean hand to transfer them into the oven. And I have another batch coming out, so they're looking beautifully done as well. You can see how they started to crowd up one another a little bit, so I could have used a little bit more space, but it's not a big deal. So as these cool down, just to allow them to solidify before I put them on my cooling rack, I'm just going to go wash my hands. So while my other cookies are waiting to come out of the oven, I'm going to actually show you how to cut the jujubes. So these are the jujubes. They're real fruit, so again, no food coloring, which makes me very excited. So I'm going to show you using a really good knife. You want to make sure it's sharp. I need to flour the board, the cutting board, and once I start cutting, you'll understand. So I'm just using the same flour. What I want to do is put a little bit of flour on my knife and then start to cut the jujube. And then I want to make sure that all of these pieces are really well floured. So the flour will actually take away the stickiness and it makes it much more manageable. So you'll see now they're all floured. So I'm going to do that to every single one. In preparation. And you'll notice when I'm holding my knife, I'm actually squeezing my thumb and my pointer index, and I'm holding the blade, and that gives me much better control, especially when using a sharp knife. Okay, so now my 4 jujubes are all floured, and now I can actually start to chop them to make them smaller, and you can go to the desired size that you want. I call these like little surprises, chewy surprises when you're biting into the cookie. And so you can see they're not unified, and that's totally fine. And I'm just going to add this to the remaining cookie dough. Okay, I think I should really check on my other cookies. They're looking beautiful. I'm so tempted to try one while the others finish up baking. Let's have one. So, again, I haven't had one of these in at least 15 years. It smells amazing. You can smell the jujubes a little bit, the coconut, and the oats. And so I'm just going to break it. And you can actually see the texture and the jujubes and the coconut and the oats. Drops of goodness. They are so tasty. So if you like what you see, please like, subscribe, I'll put the recipe in the comments below, and I look forward to baking more with you and cooking more with you. And again, my name is Verdell, and this is Cooking with V.